Good evening. I'm Caroline Bryk, Executive Director of Tikvah's Jewish Parents Forum, and it's a privilege to welcome you to our first conversation of this year's series. In this moment, as Jews in America, we are grief-stricken and heartbroken over the slaughter of our brothers and sisters in Israel. I've been hearing the same sentiment over and over again from my own friends and family, that we just aren't wired to process this magnitude of evil. And yet, at the same time, as mothers and fathers, it's not only our job, but it is our obligation to explain this harrowing reality to our children. So, what do we say? What don't we say? What is our call to action as Jewish parents right now? And in this very dark hour, how do we build in our homes a spirit of Jewish resolve? These are some of the questions that we'll explore tonight with Dr. Rachel Fish, a first-rate educator who has served on the faculty of George Washington University, Harvard, and Brandeis. Rachel is a self-described scholar warrior and has an impressive professional pedigree. She's the co-founder of Boundless, a think action tank that partners with community leaders across North America to revitalize Israel education. She has written articles for several publications in the mainstream press and co-edited the book Essential Israel: Essays for the 21st Century. Rachel is also a cherished faculty member at Tikvah and a devoted mother of four. We're so excited to hear from Rachel. But before beginning our discussion, I would like to call upon Rabbi Mark Gottlieb, Chief Education Officer at Tikvah, to offer a few words of inspiration. And please note that following my conversation with Rachel, we can take questions from our listeners. So please send in any questions you have in our chat box. So with that, let us turn to Rabbi Gottlieb.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And let me say what a pleasure it is, even under difficult circumstances, to be sharing this forum with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Rachel Fish. All of you that are on this webinar will be enriched for that opportunity. So let me take you back 22 years ago and a month, and I'll set the stage. It was a beautiful Tuesday morning, blue skies in Boston, where I had been serving for only 6 months as the upper school and middle school principal of the Maimonides School, the school founded by our revered Rabbi Soloveitchik in 1937. I was 31 years old, and on this Tuesday morning, when the news trickled in that New York had been attacked, and the information was sketchy at that time, but we knew something terrible was already afoot. Both towers had collapsed. I had the very difficult duty of gathering the entire school into our auditorium, the Saval Auditorium, and addressing the student body. I was 31. Like I said, I had barely been stationed here at the Maimonides School for less than 6 months. And I had this task of telling our students what had just happened. And the task was compounded by the fact that one of our own students, a kindergartner, had lost his father in those early attacks. Let me tell you what I learned in those few days. I won't share with you exactly what I said that morning, but it was basically a balance of truth and resolve. Truth about what had happened without details, without graphic or gory details, of course. But in the coming days, we were very fortunate in Boston and the Maimonides community to be led by one of the most gifted and inspiring Jewish leaders, Rabbi Jacob J. Schachter. And I want to share with you what he taught us in those first few days after 9/11. Said, if you look at Psalm 22, the opening verses, Keli, Keli, lama azavtani. my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Historically well-known trope. How does God justify his acts to man? How could such evil take place? Why has God abandoned me? We all have these feelings. So many of us, I'm sure, had these feelings when the news from Israel came in on Shabbat morning on Shmini Atzeres here in the United States. But within these words is a key to how we talk to our students and our children and how we create that Jewish resolve that we're all desperately craving for in these difficult days. And Rabbi Soloveitchik, who is the teacher of Rabbi Schachter and who is our great teacher, taught us that the word is carefully chosen, lama azavtani. It's not madua azavtani. In Hebrew, there are two words for the question, the interrogative question, why? There's madua and there's lama or lama. And madua would mean why. Why did this evil happen to us? Why did we allow these bandits, these barbarians into our own country to harm, to kill, to maim our own brothers and sisters, our children, our sons and daughters, our grandparents? That's not the question that we ask. We don't ask, Madua, why has this evil fallen upon us? We ask the other question, Lama, for what purpose can we learn from this experience and do something? How can we act so that we're not victims? How can we act so that the balance of responsibility falls upon us and we don't remain just passive victims to the crimes, to the evil that has occurred? And what David HaMelech, what King David, that sweet singer of the Psalms, is teaching us is that in times of crisis, in times of great evil, in times of great destruction, we don't ask the question, why did this happen? And of course, the generals have to ask that question, and we need to get a full understanding of how it happened. But in the moment of pain, the question of resolve is first and foremost. How do we respond to this act of evil? How do we battle evil? And when the equation is changed from how did this happen? How did it happen to me? How did I become this passive recipient of evil? If that question is converted to something else, the question of how can I fight the evil? How can I combat this wrong? How can I do something? Then we turn from victims to agents. We reclaim our agency. And so many schools and shuls and Jewish agencies across the country are teaching our students what to do to help, to pack a bag, to make a donation, to say Tehillim, whatever it is to change the discourse from one of passivity and victimhood to one of agency and action. And that's exactly the spirit in which tonight's conversation between Caroline and Rachel is meant to take place. How you can get insight into what to tell your children, how to frame this issue to your children. And remember, again, it's not madua, why. That question never gets a satisfactory answer. It's lama. What can I learn from this experience so that I can do something and I can make a difference? I can improve the situation. And with that, I'll take you away from my memories and my nostalgia of having to communicate to students, to our young men and women, our young boys and girls, what staring to the face of evil is like. And now you'll hear some real tactics, some real strategies and skills to do this effectively for your own children, for your own young men and women, your own young boys and girls. Have a good evening, and Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. The eternal of Israel does never abandons us. Have a good night and a good Chodesh.
Thank you, Rabbi Gottlieb, for those inspiring words. And in the spirit of asking Lama or what instead of why, I'm going to ask Rachel my first question. So I'm sure, like many of you, over the last many days, we've got lots of communication from Jewish organizations, and many have run programs on how to talk to your children about what's going on in Israel. And they've brought in psychologists and social workers and maybe grief counselors to weigh in. And those are incredibly important lenses. But tonight, I'd like to approach this differently. I'd like to try to relate to our children as young students of history who carry a deep responsibility to defend Israel, both on the physical battlefront and in the battle of ideas. So, with that in mind, Rachel, what story are we sharing with them? What backstory should we share? And equally important, what should we not share? And if you could answer this question for parents of younger kids, maybe lower school and below, and then for parents of teens, that would be great.
Thank you, Caroline. And of course, thank you, Rabbi Gottlieb, and to Tikvah and to the Parents Forum for inviting me to be with you all this evening, even under these very difficult circumstances. In terms of the question about what do you show, what do you not show, you obviously have to consider several factors, and you will hear this especially from those who are experts in the field of therapeutic approaches, trauma therapy. You have to really know your child. So I'm never here to tell a parent, this is what you must do for your child, because you know that child better than anyone else, and what that child can handle. So you have to know, the child individually, and of course, developmentally appropriate what you share with that child. So what you and how you speak to younger children differs quite dramatically from tweens, teens, and older. In terms of younger children, you really present the information as asked without editorializing, so that you can give them the basic contours of the events and the facts without make it terrifying. And the goal is to ensure that your children understand they are going to hear things, they are going to see world events unfolding, they're going to hear it on the playground or in the classroom, or when you're listening to NPR while you're drinking your coffee in the morning, whatever it may be. And so you have to be mindful that they're little sponges and they're little parrots. That's their job at that age. So they absorb so much and often just parrot back what they hear. So it is important that you are conscious of their presence when you are consuming information. I do believe that facts matter. And so therefore, if a direct question is answered, again, developmentally appropriately, answer that question. But you don't need to provide all the information that you would necessarily engage with an older child. You need to be sensitive, of course, Caroline, to their own emotions and feelings. And you also need to remind children that, especially younger children, there are good people in the world. There are good people who care about Jews. There are good people who value human dignity, because the goal here is not to make them paranoid or to make them feel isolated and alone. I also do believe as children mature, they can hold complexity, and they hold complexity at a fairly young age. They start to ask more nuanced questions, and they want to not only understand what is unfolding in front of them, but they're actually trying to make meaning of those events, and make meaning of those events in terms of their own identities. Their identity as a human, their identity as part of the Jewish community, where they fit in all of this as part of the Jewish people. So that is important to understand. And that begins to happen really by the time of 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And so I do encourage that as your child continues to mature, and again, you have to know your own child, but you can introduce them to the greater context and provide more content, again, without terrifying. I am not advocating showing them very disturbing videos of what Hamas is doing to innocent Israelis. That is not what I am suggesting. But they want to know more than you probably realize they want to know. And again, you need to be able to actually answer those questions. I want to say something, though. If you've never talked about Israel before, and this is the first time, you actually need to find a way that this is not the only piece of Israel you are talking about. Israel is so much more. Israelis are so much more than this one moment. And I am a major advocate of talking about Israel and infusing aspects of Israeli culture, Israeli society, and Israeli politics, and the complexity of Israeli identities into your larger Jewish identity, and do not outsource that. Because for far too long, the Jewish community has outsourced that conversation, and it's actually to the detriment of many of our younger Jewish children's sense of where Israel fits into the context of their personal identity, let alone their own education.
So this moment certainly calls upon us to reflect as parents in terms of what we've done so far, in terms of teaching Zionism and about Israel to our children. So what does a serious, substantive Israel education look like for young children and teens? And what can parents do starting today to cultivate a deep allegiance to Israel in their children?
So in order to really begin to build one's knowledge about Israel, you actually have to know something. Very often we start with having an emotional connection, and that's really important, that emotional connection. It's also really important to be able to recognize the role that Zion, and also, of course, Zionism has played within the context of larger Jewish history. It's important for our young children to understand why we pray facing east. When we pray, we are not facing towards Plonsk. We're not looking towards a shtetl. We are facing towards Zion. And so there's something very deep about that our children can actually hold on to and understand. I would also suggest that from my own sort of personal experiences, for me, it was very important that my children understand that we are part of a community. And this community of Jews is both a religion and a people. We're an ethno-religious identity. Because for many, in the context of America in particular, being part of the Jewish community is often understood as just being a religious group. But that peoplehood piece, that tribalism in a good way, not a pejorative or parochial way, is an essential component to Jewishness. And Caroline, one of the decisions I made as a young mother, way before I even realized perhaps the impact it might be having, is that when I would sing to my children, which many of us do, even when they were newborns, the songs that I sang to them were songs that resonated deeply in terms of highlighting that ethno-religious component of Judaism, which is why I always sang to them Tikvah and Shema every single night. And as they got older, and I was no longer necessarily holding them when singing, but rather sitting next to their beds while singing, I made a very conscious effort to explain to them that the reason we sing both of these is because of this this peoplehood, and this religious identity. I can't tell you that that's what has fermented the Zionist identities in my children, but I can tell you from my own experiences as a parent, it has 100% cultivated a knowledge in my children and a feeling in my children that they have a belonging and a sense of responsibility and a privilege in terms of being part of this community.
So what we say to our children is incredibly important, and those are great suggestions. But as parents, we also have to be aware of what we do. And I'd like to share an anecdote, something I heard this past week. So this past week, someone I know well attended an emergency meeting for top level donors to a well-known Jewish philanthropic organization in New York City. And at that meeting, top donors stepped up and committed to major gifts in support of Israel relief. And what was striking is that many donors shared during that meeting that what inspired them to give so generously was the memory of their parents giving during the Yom Kippur War. And while their parents may not have had the ability to make as generous gifts as they are now, they emptied their pockets for Israel. So this is to say, our kids are paying attention to what we do. And right now we have a real opportunity as parents to exemplify how to act in this moment of profound need. So with that in mind, what can parents on this call model right now?
Moral courage and moral fortitude. I actually think that's one of the most important things you can model for your children, because they are watching. They are watching you as their heroes. They are watching you, even if they're teenagers and they pretend they're not. They are. They are watching their teachers. And they are watching the world around us, and how the world around us either stands in solidarity with us or abandons us. So you as parents, as the prime models for your children, always are being watched. But it's not just how much money you can give, which is of course a mitzvah, but it's, do you actually say something when someone positions Israel in a negative light? What is your response? When you read an article, do you take time to write a letter to the editor when the article has fallacies in it? When you hear a podcast or a radio interview that is one-sided and hypocritical and holds Israel to a double standard, do you call the radio producer? What books are you reading? What kind of cultural events do you attend? What type of community investments are you making, both in terms of human capital investment and philanthropic investment? Your children watch every single bit of that. I want to just highlight, in terms of the moral fortitude and the moral courage, that is needed now more than ever. It is needed now because there is an understanding by, unfortunately, too much of the world that Jewish life can be expended and not at all be held accountable when someone makes that decision. We have heard, and I'm sure you have heard regularly from individuals like Dara Horn, that people do love dead Jews. And it may sound crass, but it is very clear. So the other thing that is required is for us as parents to exemplify at the essence of why living a Jewish life truly matters. It is about cultivating within our children Jewish operating systems, so that when they walk through the world, no matter what they become, no matter where they go to school, no matter where they travel, they view the world through a lens of that Jewish operating system, and it refracts every single issue that they engage with. But it is the primary system by which they organize their identity, their values, their connections, their relationships, and how they make meaning in the world. That doesn't happen if you aren't deeply engaged Jewishly. And I don't only mean religiously. There are many elements to that Jewishness and to that communal connection. But Israel also has to be a central component of that, and that peoplehood component of that. The other reason I keep saying moral courage and moral fortitude is because we're living in a world in which much of the world lacks that. Many of you may have seen over the last several days the statements made by university presidents. And I liken it to the following. It's an analogy that was shared with me, and I think it's very apt. These individuals who are university presidents, who have made a statement, who hold many important degrees of higher education, it is as if they submitted their final term paper and it's being returned to them for revisions, and they then submit a new one. And that's what we've seen with university presidents over the last several days. Those who actually submitted the statement and had pressure put on them by the university students, Jewish students, by the university Jewish parents, and by even some of the trustees, had to be able to actually recognize that their own statements fell dramatically short, and not just dramatically short in terms of the magnitude of the horrors that are unfolding in terms of the Jewish experience, but in terms of the human dignity experience. So when we see leaders in positions of major institutions in our country who do not have that moral fortitude and moral courage, we have to be able to demonstrate to our children where they have misstepped and why they have misstepped. And they are looking to you to explain that and to help them make sense of it.
So many parents on this call have reached out to me, expressing that they're connected to these types of institutions that released statements this past week that were, we could say, weak at best and offensive at worst. So how do you suggest parents communicate with these institutions respectfully yet assertively?
I actually have several individuals who I'm very close with who have shared with me that they, as parents, have reached out to university presidents and other administrators expressing their concern for what was said, the lack of context, the lack of moral clarity. And I have to say, from most of the individuals who have actually written to those university administrators, they have received very positive responses back. So part of this is about how do you build a relationship with someone? And it doesn't just need to be a university administrator. This can happen, and I'm seeing it happen regularly with superintendents, educational leaders within independent private schools, non-parochial schools, who do not know what to say, do not know how to say it, and often cow to moral equivalency. And if you can engage that educational leader in a way in which you help them learn and grow as educators and approach this in a way that isn't political. This is not a political issue. Nothing about this is political. This transcends politics. This transcends any type of religious conflict. This is ultimately about human dignity and the need ultimately for these individuals to understand the atrocities that were perpetrated against the Jewish people, against the state of Israel. And if you can approach that conversation in a way that says, here's what I heard, here's what I read, let me explain to you why this isn't working for me. Let me explain to you ultimately why this does more harm and muddies those waters rather than provides the clarity that we are seeking. And then you help them understand that the majority of them want to do the right thing. They are not looking to be ill-intentioned individuals, the majority. There are always some exceptions. But it is important to not walk around only with a big stick. You have to actually offer these educators ways in which they can grow. The majority of them do not know the resources available. They do not know where to turn in terms of the educational content. They don't understand this moment in time in comparison to other moments in time that have nothing to do with Israel and Jews. And they need guidance, and they actually need to hear from you, particularly those institutions that proclaim on a regular basis that they are about inclusivity, that they are about diversity, and they are about a shared sense of building a better world. Then all the more so they need to hear from you. But it's the approach in which you engage that deeply matters. So you have to know when to call in versus when to call out. And of course, there are times in which you need to call out as well. But it's a fine balance. And ideally, you build these relationships prior to any challenging moments that ever occurs, so that the educators, the leaders of these institutions see you as a collaborative partner and helping to create this necessary change.
I want to pivot now and discuss an issue on many parents' mind, and that's social media. Both the role it's playing in the current moment and the role it's played leading up to this moment. So before we get to the role it's currently playing right now in this war, how has social media impacted the formation of young Jews in America today, especially their relationship to Israel?
The individual to read on this topic is actually Professor Jonathan Haidt. He has written extensively on this topic. He's a social psychologist from New York University. I highly recommend you read his writings. He has an extensive essay from this summer, I believe, in The Atlantic, which is basically his forthcoming book, The Tower of Babel. That's one of the titles or the subtitle.
I'm interviewing him in December. He's coming up in our series.
Amazing. So everyone should listen to Professor Jonathan Haidt. But I would like to add a few elements that I'm sure he'll touch on as well. One is that not only social media, but the internet in general, and social media in particular, has allowed for the breakdown of civility in the public square. Individuals feel much more comfortable saying very horrible things to people rather that they may not say when they actually engage them in a public place, because of the lack of identity, because of the ability to be more anonymous, and because of the idea that I can quickly say something, say what I want, and just get it off my chest. And we all know that you never write that first email and hit send. You write that email, you let someone else proofread it, you sit on it overnight, and then you decide if you should send it or edit it. And the way in which social media functions is that the algorithms are specifically built. And we hear this, we know this, this is not hearsay. This is what the individuals from the platforms themselves have created, which is what enrages, engages. So the platform is utilized for the purpose of, how angry can I make Caroline? Because my goal is to make her as angry as possible so that she puts that angry emoji face and then feels so compelled to actually say something. And that's what drives engagement. It is not necessarily the place in any shape or form that you can have any substantive discussion, because the goal is to try to prove yourself. You are trying your hardest to end every single sentence with an exclamation point. There's no opportunity to engage with curiosity. And so that positions social media in a particular way. The other element is that we have a spread of disinformation and misinformation on social media. That's not a new phenomena. There have been trends over historical periods of time, like the Soviet Union and the way it used propaganda to create those disinformation and misinformation campaigns. And they're used in a variety of settings in the present moment, not just around Israel, but for sure, much of that also extends directly to the state of Israel and to Israelis. And it is also a place in which the tropes of anti-Semitism, the stereotypes of anti-Semitism, can now be amplified and catalyzed at a historic rate that we never imagined. We know that anti-Semitic tropes could always spread like a virus, to use the COVID analogy. We know that it's transnational. It never stayed only in one location. But because of the advent of social media, it is beyond our wildest imaginations. We also know that individuals who spend a lot of time utilizing social media tend to be more lonely, lack those human connections and that sense of belonging, and do not have the necessary skills to know how to engage in relationship in real life. Now, I'm very realistic that children have social media. I will confess to you, my children have no social media. My oldest is 14. I will also confess to you, he just got a phone. So I'm that parent, and I am fully aware of being just that parent. It helps if you never care what anybody thinks about you, which is sort of my modus operandi. So therefore, it's never bothered me. And the argument, well, so-and-so has it, or so-and-so parents said, never has flied. So you have to decide, again, what works for your child. You have to decide what works for your family unit. I will say social media, though, does not help build resiliency. It does not help build a strong sense of having the capacity to know how to hone those critical thinking skills. For too many individuals, particularly during the puberty period and before, they are consuming passively what they deem to be credible, even when it lacks complete credibility. And you as a parent do not see everything they see, even if you are on social media, because you don't have the same algorithms as your children. So I really urge you that if your child does have social media, you need to talk to them about critical thinking skills. You need to cultivate within them a strong sense of media literacy. They need to be able to ascertain, who is this information coming from? Is it a valid source? Is this credible, this video? And that is very hard to do, particularly at a point in time in which we have artificial intelligence that can doctor someone's voice, doctor the video, and clearly suggests that it took place at a particular time in a particular location when it was actually created in someone's basement. So it's becoming more and more challenging to make that distinction between what is real and what is fake. The other element about social media is that in the context of what is happening online, know that it never stays online. In the capacity in my work with Boundless, my colleague Aviva Klompus and I did research during the May 2021 conflict between Israel and Hamas. And if you remember, during that time, the onslaught that Jews were seeing on social media became referred to as the Intifada because of the way Jews in Israel were positioned on social media. What we were looking at was the relationship between the actual violence that Hamas created in 2021 and Israel's retaliatory response as an obligation to protect its citizens. The relationship then to the discourse online towards Israel and Jews, and it very quickly shifted to no longer be about Israel and to only focus on Jews, where Jews were labeled ethnic cleansers, supporters of apartheid, colonialist settlers, and then, of course, all the other anti-Semitic tropes. And then how that then relates to the real world targeting of Jews in America. And there is clearly a connection between these things. So what happens online rarely stays online and has direct real world implications in terms of the Israel-Jewish conversation. And it's important to understand that and for your children to understand that. Now, there are elements of social media that can be very important in terms of telling more news, getting information out there, but that doesn't mean that that's necessarily what your children will be exposed to. And they still don't necessarily have, again, the critical thinking skills to be able to understand what they are consuming and then how to process that.
A lot to unpack. I definitely want to come back to cultivating resilience, but to stay on social media for a moment, many leaders are calling upon us to look evil in the eye. Barry Weiss recently mentioned this in one of her pieces. But what happens when evil finds our children online? Are children supposed to look evil in the eye? We're now awakened to the reality that Hamas is using social media, a platform that follows our kids into their bedrooms, as a weapon in this war. Many heads of Jewish day schools have encouraged parents to disable these platforms from their children's devices. The head of my kids' school sent out an email encouraging us to do this. So what's your advice to parents right now whose kids are on social media? And how should this change how we think about social media going forward?
Caroline, I want to say a few elements of this. One, do not let your children have their phones in their bedrooms. Seriously, nothing good is going to come of that. Secondly, the state of Israel sent out that warning to all Israelis, to all Israeli educators. That warning then quickly came to Jews in diaspora. My children's schools also sent out that message. What we see Hamas doing is using social media in order to document the crimes against humanity. And they are documenting those crimes against humanity and then literally uploading it so that loved ones can see firsthand accounts of the horrors that those innocent civilians faced. It is unfathomable, truly. I don't care how old your children are, meaning if they are under the age of 18 and live in your house, they should not be looking at this. It is truly horrific what Hamas is doing, and it's not going to help your children process the horrors that they will learn about. It's not going to help them sleep. It's not going to at all give them a greater sense of what Israel is going through. You can describe it in enough detail that is developmentally appropriate without actually showing it. I can tell you that as a parent, I watch them. As an educator, I watch them. as someone who speaks about Israel on a regular basis and the history of Israel and the Middle East, I watch them because that is my own disposition and because I believe that it is important for me to understand. But for young people, they cannot make sense of this. It is so grotesque in many ways that it actually will cause more harm to them than help them understand what's going on. So I don't recommend children watch it. I have not allowed any of my children to watch any of it. I don't intend to. And as someone who's close with Barry, I agree with her that it's important that American adults, that Jews understand. And so I feel responsible, but I would never tell someone else what they need to see. But I feel a sense of responsibility to at least witness some of these horrors in order to be able to articulately explain the grotesqueness of this behavior and the cruelty and the magnitude of this horror. But it is not because I think my children need to see it. I also just want to say one other thing. Historically, we know that individuals who do not have the ability as world leaders, as individuals to live with these shared values that we hold so dear, but rather who are autocrats, who are dictators, who are fascists, those kinds of regimes, they tend to document the horrors they commit. Think about the Nazis. Those horrors were recorded. We have ledgers of whose jewelry and whose families were displaced and how many people from their family were killed. We have video clips of it. We have it from Saddam Hussein's regime as well. This is not uncommon among these maniacs, these terrorists who do this in order to be able to proudly share what atrocities they are committing. This is a typical behavior of these types of individuals, and we need to understand that, and that they have every intention to cause psychological harm and not only physical harm.
I want to circle back now to cultivating resilience in the next generation. How should we do that in light of everything that is happening right now?
I'll tell you a few things very quickly. One of my children goes to a school for dyslexia. So he's one of very few Jewish kids in the school, but he is very proud of his Jewish identity. He just became a bar mitzvah this summer. He knows very much who he is and from where he comes. And he had this fall festival at school, fun day, outdoor water dunk tanks and fun activities and apple bobbing and face painting. And what does this 13-year-old paint on his face? An Israeli flag. Now that may seem like something not so major, but at this moment in time in which Jews were warned of a potential day of jihad, basically, a day of rage, a day of resistance on college campuses, where unfortunately we see many, many young Jewish students hiding their Jewish identity, a form of what we call erasive anti-Semitism, where Jews are checking their Jewishness, their Zionist identities at the door so that they can be accepted. My children are the complete opposite. They are proudly displaying in these challenging moments exactly who they are. They are wearing their Magen David, charms, their necklaces. They want to be very clear and stand very tall in terms of their Jewish identity. And I will never tell them not to. Neither will my husband. So the reason they know how to do that is a few things. One, we're their parents. Like I said, they've literally heard Shema Tikvah their entire lives. They go to Jewish day school. They have a sense of history of the Jewish people. They have a joyful understanding of Judaism and a connection to Jewishness. They have traveled to Israel. They have family in Israel. And so all of this is cultivated within inside them. And they know that there is no one who is going to make them cow in terms of shaming them for their identity or telling them to hide it. The other piece is that we're big believers and knowing that you have to take the long view. And you have to then understand when taking the long view, whether it's, of education, of relationships, of Jews, that there is a history there that has real moments of despair and real moments of success. And that doesn't happen overnight. That is a constant recognition of understanding from where you come, the sense of belonging and the sense of particularism that they own, while recognizing that it has to be in relationship with universalism, the sense of connection and of building a larger, better world, not exclusively and only for the Jewish people. And so it's that fine balance of that tension between particularism and universalism that we talk about in my family, that we put in very concrete terms. What does it mean to be the stranger in the strange land? What is your responsibility? What does it mean to be part of a community that's over there, and yet you're deeply connected and have a deep sense of belonging to, even if it's over there? Those are incredibly important elements. My kids are also strong athletes. Rabbi Gottlieb knows this. We are a family of athletes. And that sense of being an athlete means perseverance, grit, determination. None of it happens overnight. None of it happens just because you feel like you want it. You actually have to earn it. You have to put in the hard work. And that relates to me exactly to the Jewish people. And you didn't get a state because you desired it. You had to fight for it. And I do think that for our children, not just mine, but I'm saying all of our children, that if we don't cultivate a sense of resiliency at a very young age, especially when we live in a world right now in which we want instant gratification, which is another piece of social media, and also at a point in time in which there's a very strong tendency to do what the herd mentality wants you to do, and we need to actually be countercultural. And Judaism is countercultural in its essence. It is one of the most profound elements of Judaism. And so those pieces all combined create and begin to develop that sense of resiliency, and our children will understand it and innately have it inside them, and will be able to build their reserves to know how then to tap into it when it is needed most.
Thank you, Rachel. This has been very inspiring, and we're so grateful for your time. I'd like to take a few questions that have come in. So first, I'm an educator in a Jewish day school tasked with teaching Zionism. What's your call to action for educators in day schools today, who have the responsibility to transmit a deep allegiance to Israel at a time like this?
I think my call to action is both in terms of ensuring that you feel confident to share the content, the actual substantive knowledge, and also to have and demonstrate courage to talk about it. There's a balance here between providing real information while also providing a sense of inspiration, and you need to be able to do both of those things. Even for young kids, again, that sense of doing. A lot of people have been talking about these modalities of the head, the heart, and the hand, meaning what do they need to know developmentally appropriately? How do they feel, and help them have a space in which they can navigate that emotional response and emotional connection? And then with their hand, what do they do? And it's sometimes very simple, and yet it is profound. So having children write those letters to their counterparts, their peers who are in Israel, record videos, sing songs. They can even raise tzedakah for the initiatives that are relevant to children their own age in Israel. Those are things that every child can do, and they can do it at a young age or they can do it at an older age. But there is that sense of how do you connect all three of those? And I think that particularly at this moment, Jewish educators, Israel educators actually have to be able to clearly demonstrate to their students that they have that content knowledge and they can share with them that information. Because once again, if you don't share it with them, they're going to find another source, and you don't know if it's a trustworthy source. And then also simultaneously meld that content with the actual modeling of the courage to talk about it, frame it, and be proud of who Israel is, who Israelis are, and who and how that impacts your own identity.
I think we'll take one more. It's been terrifying to witness the glorification of this bloodshed on college campuses, and we're seeing chilling examples of this at our most elite institutions. I have a child applying to college this year. Should I be thinking about where he applies differently?
I don't know where the child is applying, but yes. I would suggest the following. You want to know that there is a Jewish presence on campus. I have talked to many, many friends who have sent their children to incredible institutions. Reputation alone, there are probably institutions many on this webinar would want their own children to go to, and yet there are very few Jews. And their children feel so isolated, secluded from the Jewish community, and really, truly alone in a way they didn't imagine they would feel. So know what Jewish life is like, whether it's Hillel, whether it's Chabad, whether it's a larger Jewish student center on campus. It's important to understand that. It's also important to understand what kind of Jewish studies programs exist on campus. And it's not to suggest that every Jewish studies program has everything. But if you're only talking about, for example, the ancient Near East, you're leaving out some very important historical moments in Jewish history. If it's only Holocaust studies, not sufficient. That's the glorification in some ways of dead Jews. Important and necessary, but definitely not sufficient. So know and understand that. Understand, have the diversity, equity, and inclusion officers actually spent time educating their own university administrators, the presidents, the provosts, the deans of student life, deans of residential life, communications professionals, general counsels about what is anti-Semitism and how does it manifest on college campuses. Can they label it? Can they identify it? Do they know what the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition is of anti-Semitism? Do they know what Title VI is from the Office of Civil Rights and the way in which Title VI has to be upheld for Jewish students on campus and Jewish faculty on campus? If these are foreign concepts to the universities, that should give you great pause. I think that when you are looking at a campus, to ensure that there are opportunities and options to live a vibrant Jewish life, because that is a formative period of time in young people. This is when they build real deep connections with their peers. This is a time in which they are exploring intellectually, and they're very impressionable, extremely impressionable. And so you want to make sure that they're in institutions that value critical thinking, that really see the university as a marketplace of ideas, and yet prioritize Jewish safety. And if they don't, I don't care how good of an institution it is, you may want to reconsider.
Well, Rachel, this has been a rich and empowering conversation. Again, we're so grateful for your time. As we touched on tonight, young Jews really need to understand the strategic realities of the Israeli war and the deeper lessons of Jewish faith and history. At Tikvah, we believe that in order to grasp the challenges of the hour, young Jews need to study history, strategy, Jewish ideas, and the complicated fault lines of Israel and the Middle East. So I'm pleased to share that in that spirit, Tikvah has put together a 5-week program of Jewish and Zionist learning with 35 unique classes offered live for 30 minutes over Zoom every weekday and multiple times on Sunday. And these classes are open to anyone who registers. Classes cover everything from the meaning of Israel's Declaration of Independence to the background of Hamas to explorations of Jewish prayer and poetry in dark times, and much more. You can browse the full list of classes and register at tikvahonlineacademy.org. We hope that you and your children will join in a deep and enriching study of Israel together with us. Again, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Rachel, Rabbi Gottlieb. May God protect the brave men and women of the IDF and bring comfort to the people of Israel. Have a good night.